Brilliant. Well, thanks so much. We're really lucky, as I said, to have Ilias Bartolini here with us today. He said I don't need to pronounce his name with my bad Italian accent, so I tried there, but it slipped out anyway. I'm going to give just a little introduction to who he is. I know we shared some resources in advance, but he self-describes himself, which I thought was lovely, as a curious software developer and technologist who's really passionate about free and open software, open knowledge, digital rights, continuous learning, and social justice. He grew up in Italy, but has had the pleasure of living in 4 continents, calling the UK, Brazil, the United States, Kenya, Germany, and Spain his home. I think, based on if I following your digital presence accurately, you're in Berlin right now, but it's hard to say. People are moving all around. Great, thumbs up. He's based in Berlin. On a more professional side, he's a technical leader and also has done a lot of work, as I read, advising nonprofits and social enterprises, especially those that are really interested in using technology to enable social good. For the purposes of our talk today, I think we're most interested in his current role as a software engineering manager at Ecosia. Great name pronunciation. Yes. Brilliant. And it's a search engine, as you all know, committed to planting trees and having a big impact on reforestation. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to him and have him introduce himself. As we all introduced ourselves in our orientation by asking the question or answering the question, what's a hobby or fun fact about you and where would you build your dream home? I'm also going to ask him to share his answers there and add anything else that I've missed to supplement his life story before he begins talking. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you a lot, Amy, and Anthony is also happy to see everyone joining, and very excited to talk with you, especially as as you said, I see this as an opportunity to get to know about each other. And I prepared only very few slides, but I really prefer like to hear your question, and feel free to type them in the chat at any time, or at the end. I will leave plenty of time for curiosities and more. And I'm gonna maybe share my screen only for the first part. I prepared a little introduction about Ecosia, and I had a few more slides. I'm gonna try to share the screen to see if that's gonna work. And I'm curious to hear as well. I heard the input from some of you. What is your role? What are you doing? And because one of the question is one of your hobbies and passion, I actually had prepared a slide for it. And one that for me is actually something that also attracted me to the climate movement is photography. And I think in the introduction that you made about me, you already said everything, many of the things that I also put here to describe myself. I usually struggle to find a summary. Luckily, I wrote it online and you found it. And so that was already great. And I'm mentioning like as a hobby, photography, and which is really interesting. It's one of those things that attracted me to the climate movement. I was often going around with my camera through cities, doing like street photography. And one day, it was 2011, I found myself in the middle of the equivalent of Occupy Wall Street, but in London. And I was there with my camera. And so there was a protest and people occupying squares against many of the issues with the financial and international globalization issues. And I was there taking pictures with my camera. It was funny because it was just a hobby. I published my pictures online with Creative Commons license. And a few weeks later, I saw my pictures going in places like international newspapers in Spain, used by activists to amplify their voices. And it was kind of a serendipity moment. And that kind of attracted me to social movement. I started going always around on the weekend with my camera, trying to publish more of these. And it kind of got me connected with people, movements, NGOs, campaigns, and kind of was one of the reasons that also attracted me to the climate movement. There was one more question where I would like to live, my dream place.
Yes, where would you build your dream home?
Actually, I have. I'm now in Berlin, and I'm in this tiny apartment contributing to the gentrification of the city. And I'm actually really looking to find a community like an eco village outside of Berlin. There is actually one that I'm trying to nudge. It's called ZEGG, ZEGG, that I'm trying to like maybe spend some time with them and see how living and working with them in a community type of setup will be like.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. That's my last mandatory thing I'll ask of you. And otherwise, we will let you share anything that feels relevant on your mind.
Cool. Thank you. And I'm gonna break the ice a little bit, telling a little bit. I told you the story of how we got connected to climate movement and activism. And I think many of you mentioned in the introduction that you're looking for how to switch or find a career in a climate-related topic. And to me, it was a lot about this serendipity of being connected to movements. I think I was working before Ecosia for a large consulting company called ThoughtWorks. It's an international company, also gave me many opportunities. And one of them was also internally, we had an initiative about social justice, which now is renamed about social impact to make it more friendly to investors. But the core idea was about how to contribute and support movements with technology. And it's something I got very well like engaged with. But I was still living in a struggle because I was kind of a consultant on my daytime, going to clients, sometimes being the big polluters in this world. And on the side or few hours a week, I was working with social movements about different type of struggles. And so this tension kind of grew more and more. I also can mention that at a certain point, I was really working for a client airline. Before that, I was also working for an oil and gas company for a short project. Luckily, that project was canceled, so I was so happy. But I was living this struggle in my day-to-day, and like it's really hard to feel motivated and do something that is against some of my ethical awareness that was growing over time. It's not something that happened from day to night, but in the arc of probably 3-4 years. And in between, before switching to Ecosia, I also took a 1-year sabbatical, and I did one of those things like take a break, and I'm sure I'm gonna change the world during this year of sabbatical and find a social project I can contribute to. And didn't happen. I took a couple of online courses and did a couple of small projects, but didn't really made meaningful contributions, except maybe a few ones. And because I was embedded in social movement, especially in the climate, I remember one day, one that I contribute most in Barcelona, which is my previous city, is Extinction Rebellion. And I remember some of my colleagues, let's say comrades of Extinction Rebellion, sharing a blog post, which is this one that you see on my screen now. Ecosia takes radical steps to support climate activism. And it kind of attracted my attention. And it's also like that thing. I think sometimes what drives our choices is the tiny thing that attracts our interest and the networks we are connected with. This was kind of my key learning at that time. And in this case, I actually felt very connected by this title because I know a few friends who like got arrested during a protest, which it's something we should not idolatrize, but it's something that happens depending on the level of engagement that people having certain movement. And this blog post was saying, if you join Ecosia, you can go to protest during your work time. And if you get arrested, you will get legal support by the company. And I said, oh, wow, this is strange and different. I don't want to get arrested, first of all. It's not something that anyone that is not comfortable with it should do, also based on our privilege and where we live. But from there, I started a journey of looking and searching companies that were doing climate-related work in their day-to-day, not only going beyond the blog post. So I'm going to spend 5 minutes talking about Ecosia and explain what we do and who we are. And you might know Ecosia as a search engine. You go to ecosia.org, you see probably this page. And what we do is not different from what DuckDuckGo does or Google does. You can search and find some results online. What is different is the business model behind it. And I say, in fact, often our core business is not search. Our core business is planting trees. There is that counter that you see on the page now is 133 million and something trees, which is the number of trees we planted in the last 10 years since Ecosia existed. And the majority of these are actually in the last 2 years because there has been a big growth in terms of users. And how we do that is we are de facto a no-profit company. So Ecosia is owned by a foundation in part. So it's similar to Mozilla Foundation. So money cannot get out of the company and money cannot be given to shareholders and cannot be sold to others. And so except for covering our costs from the search advertisement, everything else goes to NGOs, and I'm gonna skip some slides that do this on the ground. I'm gonna keep this short and do this, which is basically they find seeds, they plant them. What you see here is a nursery, which is basically after you planted a seed, you wait a few months until you have a little plant that can survive. This is the method that is used for majority of species that we work with, even if it varies based on the region. And then we wait, we monitor the trees. So there's also technology behind it. After a few months, we go back where we planted and we count how many trees. We make statistical models about it. We go back after 3 years and we monitor again. And we also have commitments with all the planting partners that 10 years after the trees has to be still there. And we always look at trees must stay for the long, even after the 10 years. So that's it, basically. It's just basically what I liked it is you take an idea of something that already exists, a search engine, and you just do it differently. And the motivation in the companies are different, is the way of working also are different because we don't look for making our CEO rich and run with the rocket in space. Actually, our CEO has an internally public salary, which is not very different from anyone else in the company. And we make what we do for planting more trees and giving more to our partners. I'm going to spend just 2 minutes, then I'm going to pause a moment. These are the places where we plant trees. There are more than 40 locations and partners around the world. The biggest projects are around the equator because there the trees solve multiple challenges. Not only we go from, this is a picture taken in Brazil 2 years after planting, before and after, not only we restore ecosystem, I'm gonna go to there. We do that to capture CO2. We do that because planting trees protects water sources, especially for local population. And this is often one of the biggest benefits for the local populations. We have projects like in Sudan where they prevent erosion and the desertification of the land. We have projects like in Kenya where we create corridor between forests to protect habitats of certain endangered species. And ultimately, we also have the majority of our projects that are something like trying to improve the food security. So it's either through water sources and sometimes through agroforestry. So we also plant trees that can give a livelihood to the local population. It's fun. When I joined, I remember one of the biggest challenge to tree planting. We might think of number one, logging industries. It's actually the second one, it's farming. And we always say the goat that eats the little plants before they become fully tree are actually the biggest enemy. And there is a very good reason, because people need goats for survival. And so it's very important for us to work with local communities to provide an income to them. So usually local communities who plant the trees, and also provide an alternative to their food chain and food security. And that's it, basically. I'm gonna pause a moment, like if there are any questions or curiosity. I actually lost track of the chat. I'm not hearing them.
I have a question. Yeah, for tree planting projects like this, is there a lot of like land and sort of communities that are ready to go and they just need the labor and the funding for it? Or is, because like I'm wondering, is it just a matter of mobilizing people to do the tree planting, or is it tricky to find the land, like you say, that doesn't have other things competing for its use too?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think the way Ecosia work, we make public calls, and we usually ask experts in tree planting and NGOs and organizations to join these calls. And I have to say, there are plenty of them, and they have very, very diverse. Obviously, some easy spots where you have a lot of land and that is unused, and it's where desertification is happening. Like South Sudan is an example. There is the so-called sub-Saharan belt, which is actually by itself is a continent, and there is, as long as there are partners and local people, we could be planting trees for many decades. Hopefully we can do that quicker. And sometimes I think it's very tricky, what you just said, like we go sometimes and visit the partners and try to get a feeling of how they are integrated in the local community, because we also understand and we are very aware that sometimes when you trickle down money to help doing a local activity, this actually can cause conflict rather than helping. And so we have a series, 2 years ago, we also introduced a legal contract with human rights clauses. For example, we pretend that our partners employ also women on the ground, that they don't do discrimination, and a series of lists I'm not an expert on, but human rights lawyer helped us review. And then we often, before COVID, we often were going to make also local visits. Sometimes we send third-party partners to do visit unexpectedly, and kind of auditing what's happening in the project, especially the biggest one. Yeah, so the monitoring part aspects is not a simple topic. Is actually the one that needs more care and attention. I have more than building a website, I have to say. In fact, we have an entire team in Ecosia, which is currently 8 people, that is focusing on monitoring and creating sometimes also helping our partners building these business models for themselves, and sometimes connecting partners to exchange ideas and on best practices.
Hey, Liz. Thank you for being here. Quick question. I think for Ecosia, have you seen, I guess, the immediate impact really show at the scale that you're capturing, like the CO2 at scale? Is that clearly visible in some aspect to really, affecting the greenhouse gases?
I think at the scale that we are, if we consider the global problem, it's probably a tiny drop still. I remember, I'm trying to remember the numbers on top of my head, but we often talk about 1 billion trees to remove is less than 1% of the CO2 extra that is in the atmosphere. And now we did 100 millions in 10 years. So there's still much more than Ecosia did, but let's say now we are only to 1% of the internet users. If we can take over Google, maybe we can do it. That's my hope.
Awesome, thank you.
And it's also, I think, the scale and the impact in terms of, there's also actually there was an article in the media in the last couple of days of CO2 capture technology. I guess some of you are nodding, might have read it. As nowadays, except obviously we need to keep investing also in research and technological solutions, but those are not viable yet. Nowadays, only considering the CO2 capture, trees is still the most efficient technology that we know how to deploy at scale. There are research around algae in the ocean and other types of CO2 capture, but trees is still the most cost efficient, and without considering all the other benefits that I also mentioned. And so, yeah, I always tell, yeah, we should keep planting trees, but yeah, keep exploring also all the solutions. And I'm pausing again.
And it looks like, thanks so much, Oscar, for your question. It looks like Grant has a question in the chat. And Grant, if it's hard for you, wherever you are, to speak, I'll read your question aloud, but or Grant has a question, which is, are there any unique opportunities or challenges you find working for a climate-focused nonprofit compared to a more traditional business?
Cool. Unique opportunities or challenges? I'm starting with, actually, some of the things are very, in our business models are very similar, because we are still a company, and sometimes we are still focused on, which is sometimes it's hard for me to say, we are focused on growth still, because like we want to grow more users, because we want to make more profit, because we want to give away more of it. And so in that sense, it's not so different. And I think Ecosia is very lucky because the search engine sector is actually really, really profitable. And that's why Google is the second or third biggest, Alphabet is the second or first biggest company in the world. And in comparison, like Ecosia is less money efficient than Google. But we still are able to give away a lot of it. Actually, I had a previous slide. I'm going to back to it. We publish our financial reports. And every month, this is July this year. So last month, 2 months ago. And we have like more than 70% of our revenue. It's extra, which either goes to paying taxes, which is something we do very happily in comparison to other companies who try to evade them, or go to planting trees. Our operational costs are comparatively small. I think it's this azure light blue area here. So that's it. Most of the money then that is extra goes to paying trees. And we also try to be transparent of which partner we pay and when. And if you go on our website, you can see also the name of the NGOs we partner with. And interestingly, working for a business that has a strong mission, I think Ecosia is one of those companies which is in a startup growth phase. When I joined 1.5 years ago, we were 40 people, and now we are 78. So we almost doubled. And so there's actually, I see the same problem that I've seen in other startups. Things are changing fast. The pandemic hit us. People struggling working remotely, and because we have a strong mission, I also see more frequently than other company, we have to be careful to tell our colleagues and employees, please take a break. People sometimes they feel it's only one element, but it feels so motivated about what they do that we also have to remind ourselves that yeah, it still has to be a sustainable work and job, and we need to take care of ourselves. I saw 2 raised hands, so I'm gonna pause. Fotis, I think you haven't spoken.
Yeah, thanks. So I was going through your website and I noticed that Ecosia claims to be powered 200% by renewable energy, right? So not only do you produce what you need, but you also provide back to the energy grid. So first of all, do you have your own data centers, and where does this energy come from, and how do you deal with the intermittency of renewable energy?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's also one thing that is very hard to measure, and this is also based on the best guesses and researches that we found online. This 200%. I'm going to talk about it later, but the data centers. We actually at the beginning we had our own small servers hosted in a German company. But as we've been growing, we had to switch to the cloud. Actually, Ecosia has 2 main partners. One is also public for us, is we partner with Microsoft Bing for the index. We don't do the indexing. We use Bing and Microsoft APIs for that part. And regarding our servers and the cloud, we use Amazon. And we only host our services in those regions that are called sustainable, which that means Amazon already pays credits to compensate for the emissions. But on top of that, we also calculate, we used a tool called Footprint Calculator recently. But also before that, we already had other research in the area that allowed us to estimate the carbon footprint of our servers. And the good thing that we often do is we do look at our emissions. Actually, when you are in the cloud, most of the time when you try to reduce costs, it's very, very directly related to reducing emissions on the cloud. There's like the difference and between the two. If you try to optimize for cost, you are most likely already optimizing also for emissions. And so that was already easy before. Now we have more tools to look into it, and we do that and track that as well. And one last thing, surprisingly, you might not know, we looked at the research in the past about the CO2 emission of, we don't only look at our service, we look estimates of the internet connections, the devices, the screen of the person using it, the crawler energy. So usually are called, I don't remember, level 2 or section 2 emissions, which are not the direct one, but they're the one of running our services and using it. And we found some estimates online, the most recent, some research that published a few years ago. And when we compared that CO2 emission, which now I don't remember the number, I might have a number later in the slides, it's like the CO2 emission of our servers is actually 5 5% of the whole chain. Most of the emission is actually the user screens and devices, and part of the indexing part, which is hosted by Bing.
Nice, thank you.
And there was a question before also. I don't see it on the
I was
screen,
just wondering,
Peter.
where did like the initial funding for Ecosia come from? I know like a lot of startups, they get venture capital, people basically betting that they're going to have this like super profitable thing. So if your business model is not that, like how did this, get enough funding to get off the ground?
Yeah, it was bootstrapped by our founder, Christian, and secondly by a partner that he found, which was already a successful entrepreneur, which means already successfully raised money before and had some of their own, which also was very connected with the mission of the Ecosia. In fact, for the first 8 years, actually was run as a very small company. As I told, like for the first 5 years, Ecosia was like 5 people in total, and it took a lot of time to get the user growth. I think it happened a lot with word of mouth, and I have to be honest also, sadly, whenever there are incidents in the media like wildfires, people share, use Ecosia, and people come to us. When there was an incident in Germany a few years ago of coal mining industry was trying to cut a forest, and somehow on social media, Ecosia got viral as the company who bid it to try to buy that forest from the coal plant. So there is a kind of a social media marketing that helps scale our growth. And in fact, actually, if you see this chart on the screen right now, there is a considerable part is this spreading the word, which is like 10% of our revenue goes back into growing our user base. And we try to be very careful measuring that conversion and making sure that every extra cent that we spend there is actually bringing us 2 extra cents that we can bring into trees. I don't know if I answered your question. And the bootstrapping and the funding. Yeah, it was from the founder. And I think that's also one thing that is characteristic of Ecosia. I think a similar startup at the moment, DuckDuckGo, for example, is growing much faster than us. Is our competitor, by the way, probably the main competitor in the similar space. And recently got 100 million in VC funding. And we made a choice as Ecosia saying, we know that probably we could get a similar funding, or maybe Microsoft or Google would like to buy us. But I think that was a really courageous choice of our founder of giving some of the shares to this foundation. And it's a choice that he did only 3 years ago, so not something that happened in the beginning.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thanks.
Do you mind if I ask another question?
Yes, please go
Thanks.
ahead.
So I was looking through this, Adonis actually shared an interview of yours with us, and I was looking through this interview, and I noticed that you, at some point, you were working for this project for a big oil company, as you mentioned earlier in this call, and then you decided to raise awareness internally regarding this project and so on and so forth, and then it got canceled, which is quite interesting because I do work for a company that actually contributes to pollution quite a lot because we move cars around. So how do you start such a campaign internally in your company? And do you need to do that in a subtle way, or would you go fully aggressive about it and start calling people out on their emissions and stuff?
So very good question. I'm happy to. I think I learned a lot from it. Happened actually twice in my previous company, and I think there was a third, more or less, case. And I think I learned a lot. It depends also on company culture and internal company politics sometimes. In my case, I can tell you my story. Actually, the first that I mentioned was also the same company that built, I don't know if some of you remember the Standing Rock campaign on a gas pipe, oil tar sand pipeline, sorry, from Canada to US, and which also involved indigenous local populations and so on. And this was very visible in the media. And our company was working for a gas pipeline for the same client. And you start putting there some arguments like, you know, this is a marketing threat for our company, because if it gets out that we're working for the big polluter, we are not gonna be well, so it's like a company risk. And are you sure you want to keep working with them? And so you can start having this conversation. Then internally, obviously, we were doing, there were 2 or 3 of my colleagues with me. We were doing like sharing, raising awareness on climate in general, and a documentary on climate change. Why don't we do a Thursday together? We watch a movie and we hang out in the office drinking a beer. And so there's kind of grassroots work to kind of raise awareness of more and more people. And then I think I can tell 2 stories. The first one, I think we were lucky because I think our leadership also in the company was very aligned and also had this social justice angle as one of the pillars of the company. And so they actually went to the client and said, okay, we can work on the gas side, but if you ask us to work on tar sand, we will not do it. We would rather lose this very profitable contract with you, but not do it. And interestingly enough, the big polluter decided to kick us completely, our company, also from the gas project. And a few years later, I also heard rumors of when my company, ThoughtWorks at the time, was taking some contract with other companies in Europe, that the big polluter TransCanada kind of blacklisted us, put us on a list and told her all their suppliers don't work with ThoughtWorks, which is a very impactful thing if you have a business that sometimes is struggling and you have to make hard choices. And so they're not without consequences. And the second one, as I'm mentioning, now I can say all of this freely because I don't work anymore for ThoughtWorks, but please, I will ask to edit this video later. It's for another company, Exxon. This was even more, I think, probably was one of my proudest moments in the company. This was recent 3 years ago. And Exxon asked us to have a partnership with the Barcelona office of ThoughtWorks. And when this came out, like 2-3 people started organizing, and we built an internal newsletter, an internal open letter. Like sometimes you saw other company, Google, Amazon, employees do it internally. And we did that. We gathered an initial core group of 20-30 people, and then sent this open letter around and asked, if you agree with us, put your name here. And that became viral. Also went to other offices in other countries in the world. And Exxon didn't get to work with us in Spain, Barcelona. It was actually, yeah, really, really good. In this case, I think the leadership team was a bit against this open letter, but I think the employees put together their voices, and especially, I think in tech sector, I think we are very lucky and privileged that for many of us it's easy to find an alternative. And I also think it's very, the knowledge workers in tech knowledge-based companies, you still have when you are collectively together, I think you have a big weight, a big lever on your leadership team. So you just have to manage this. Yeah, thank you. Also, I have to say it's courage. I have to one thing on courage. It is one thing that I learned probably more from activism. There is a tiny bit of fighting your fears, and I think also sometimes going in the street and doing some actions, or going as a photography, following some action. You kind of learn to do that incrementally, and I think no one should go to a level where they feel threatened, and no one should risk their social security for this. But I think over time you learn a bit to deal with your fears is part of it, and a bit learn also to see that actually when things work out and you win once, actually boosts your confidence a lot. Like after we got a little success once, then you look for the second one. Is like campaigning outside also how social movements do. And also there are tactics that you can take from social movements, like who is your ally, who is the people that you can convince, who is the people who is against your opinion, and look at what are different narratives to shift their opinions. And so all tactics are good to solve the climate change problem, I think. And yeah, that's it. I don't know if what time is it, and if there are questions.
I have a question. I second Oscar's very good points. Mike, one thing that some of the members of this crew or class talked about was really being interested in figuring out how best to leverage their skills to make the biggest impact in addressing climate change. I'm curious to hear sort of your philosophy and thoughts around making impact, and what sort of like reforestation as sort of an area, is that something that you perceive to be sort of like the biggest impact you made, or do you not think in terms of sort of like making sure you're optimizing that?
Yeah. So thank you, for introducing this topic. I think also here I'm starting with, I was very lucky to meet a couple of colleagues that were very thoughtful about how to approach this topic that you just mentioned. And I think I learned and got inspired from them. Also, I have to mention, actually, I'm gonna share the link while we're here. One of them, while I was working of ThoughtWorks, I got to know a colleague who is, this is a link, 2 minutes video to watch later. Aaron Schwartz is a US technologist who used to work for organizations like Creative Commons, was one of the co-founders of Reddit. And he also had this mindset of connecting technology and activism. I think probably a lot of the things I learned and I'm telling also come from what I learned from him and other of my colleagues in this group. And that inspired me a lot. There were two things that he often said. I'm talking in the past. If you don't, some of you might not know the story. Aaron Schwartz, unfortunately, was prosecuted 6 years ago very heavily in the US. And after a couple of years of struggles, committed suicide, which was an event that was also emotional. I'm still getting emotional, very impactful for me, because still, even if I haven't met him in person before that, we were often on video calls and discussing on mailing list about these topics. But that kind of helped me also, like going back to many of the things he said. There's a very good documentary you can also find online about his story. And one of the things he used to say is, what is the most important thing you could do in the world right now? And if you're not doing, why not? And it was very, very direct about it. And also, I think if you look at this documentary, his life is probably tells the story of how he did that over time in his life as well. And so that inspired me, and together with the stories of other people that I met. So I kept this with me, this question, like, what is the most impactful thing and how do I choose, and what element I put in it. I put what are my key skills, my experience coming from, what is the ecosystem and network that I'm connected with, and how do I use that? And then some of the questions you can use, they are the same as how business startup, what is the opportunity, what is the risk, can I make a choice of like maybe risk a little bit of my personal security and safety in exchange of, yeah, maybe do something that is a bit braver. And I think from time to time, another habit that I started 8 or 9 years ago is the idea of doing a personal retrospective once per year. Now, since COVID started, I have to be honest, I stopped, but I think I'm taking an emotional break during COVID. And but I used to look every 6 months to 1 year. Not only, sometimes we do this in our career, like performance, job reviews and so on. And I used to take the same question at the broader level. Like, how do I ask the same question in my life and think about impact? And actually, I have, I had also some slides. Like, I'm very, I try to be diligent about it. Like, I also make a timeline of what I did in the last few years. I usually do a workshop on a whiteboard, and I summarize it and some of the projects, some of the initiative, and I try to think, okay, given what I learned, what I want to do next, and what is really important for me. And I also have a tiny card that I carry with me. I used to have Post-its also on my wardrobe in my bedroom. I moved recently and I have to put them up again. And I kept evolving this. I usually have 3 or 4 themes that I keep going back like every few months. And to me, after long reflection, the themes that I keep looking when I do this retrospective is sustainable self. So I look, do I have enough for myself to be sustainable in terms of finances, in terms of personal health, in terms of time to spend taking care of myself. Second is creating a community where I can have a sense of belonging. And actually, this is one of the things that also triggered me to switch job recently. Like, I was feeling that the tensions I had in the community around me, I wouldn't belong anymore. And I was looking for something where I was looking more feeling of belonging. And people that I'm aligned with that have my same values, like they care about the climate, do they care about other injustices, or do they like inclusivity and being in a diverse and inclusive space, these type of questions. And these are kind of the basics foundation of my, I call it like the Maslow pyramid of needs. And then on top of that, I currently put growing others, the social justice impact, and how do I do that? Considering my situation, I think the way I could engage, one is like radical technology and open source. That's the way I phrased it. And that's also what attracted me. Maybe Ecosia is more about the business model, but also Human Rights Connected is an organization I partner with. And the other things that I spend my time on is photography and journalism. So how do I help media and also use this hobby to do something good? And I have to be honest, I make this framework for myself, but then like 50% of the time I have to take care of myself, and I play video games. I don't do this every day, every hour, let's say.
That's good. We don't want you to be a hero that we can't obtain. So it's nice to humanize you. And I really appreciate how thoughtful you are about your values. So thanks so much for sharing that practice. Oscar, I know we have about 7 more minutes. So I'm conscious of time, but Oscar, we'd love to hear your question.
Thank you. And I think for me, it's both an agreement of kind of taking care of yourself. I've had to do that a lot. I'm involved in immigrant rights here in the US. I'm undocumented, so I can't leave the country. because of the way I came to the States when I was 4 as a child without any legal paperwork. But so I'm involved in that. And then climate, just, I guess there's a lot of bells and, everything calling your name to like help and do all these things. So I think what you said really resonates with me of kind of putting down on paper so that you don't overextend yourself. And I guess what I'm getting with that is again, I think, do you think Ecosia would ever move to maybe like some part of their APIs or their tools to like maybe an open source platform so people in the community can contribute to? Because for me, it's hard for me to jump into a nonprofit where financially my parents have no retirement accounts because they've been blue collar laborers all the time. And so for me, it's like, not only am I building wealth for myself, but just to take care of my parents in the future. And jumping jobs to a nonprofit that 9 times out of 10 won't pay as much as what you can get in this industry. It's hard to kind of make that brave decision of losing that security of you have this versus that. And so getting involved with open source is what I think might be my calling in times that I have free. So curious to know if Ecosia has plans for things like that.
Actually, you are hitting a nail in the head. Actually, I really want Ecosia to open more. And we only have a open code of one of our mobile apps. And we want to open source the second one. Actually, my boss, in quotes, boss, CTO, shared the tech strategy draft 1 week ago before going on holiday. And I have to go there and comment why we're not adding open source to our strategy. And so I agree with you. And I think we are doing not enough on this area yet.
Excited to hear more than in the future.
I really appreciate you bringing up that point, Oscar, and sort of all the realities that we're grappling with as we choose our work. I do want to ask sort of the classic end of these kind of conversations question was, what advice would you have for folks who are curious, enthusiastic, and concerned climate folks who have the software skill set? But before I ask the advice question, pausing for any last questions from the audience. It's not really an audience, it's really a co-collaborative discussion. Fotis, yes.
Thanks. Does Ecosia plan on expanding to other technologies that are directly related to climate change? For example, I don't know, environmental modeling or something, or even carbon capture or whatever.
I'm mentioning some of the business product strategy of Ecosia at the moment. Our core will stay search. One thing that we are looking in terms of broadening our spectrum is to move from the search engine that plants the trees to the browser, the way of browsing the web that plants trees. This is kind of the product vision and statement. So we are gonna probably in long term look also, maybe we're gonna have a desktop browser, maybe we start having other services that is not search, like Mozilla is doing something similar, trying to add services. Brave is adding a VPN to their services, and we might do something in this direction. In the short term, we actually have already ideas. One of them is we want to transform the search engine, and we are doing some research with the university team on this. On also the idea is a personal assistant that can help you make greener decisions. So we don't only want to display the answer to your question, but if you search iPhone on Ecosia or you search I want to buy an iPhone, maybe there is the Amazon advertisement there, which because Amazon pays to it for Amazon, but next to it we can put, why don't you repair your phone? Have you considered exchanging the battery? Or these are a list of phones and their footprint. Why don't you choose based on this? And you can do this in every sector, like the way you travel, the food you buy, and so on and so on. Where do you want to get the coffee? Where is the most sustainable cafe in Berlin, and so on. And it's a very difficult problem, and we're going to tackle one area at a time because it's also a lot of data, machine learning, and that is needed to answer those questions. Amy's question, I think.
Yeah, I will let Greg, because you are here. You've given us so much wisdom and advice throughout the talk. We'll let Greg have our seminal last question. And if anyone needs to hop out right at the hour, we'll be respectful, and we'll try to be also respectful of our speaker's time. But Greg, we'll leave it with you.
I'm curious what for-profit companies do you most admire in the climate space, and which ones do you get inspiration from? That'd be really interesting to hear your point of view.
Fantastic. I remember before, in the last 2-3 years, actually, I made a list of places where I was looking of what is gonna be next in my journey. And I made a list, and I was starting to select companies and organizations in the area of, I had 2 or 3 themes. One was climate and sustainability. The other was privacy, online, like freedom of information, or how do you make information better online, and medical sector. So this kind of area of impact. So there's actually broad spectrum. And when I was looking in the climate space, actually I didn't find much more. I was always reflecting also with this perspective, what is the place where I can have the best perspective and in terms of impact I can have there. And I found many companies nowadays that they were similar to companies who do certifications for business to business. And then they have on the side, they also plant trees, or they have carbon compensation projects. And now one company that ended up in my radar, but mainly because I know a couple of friends there that moved there, is Climate Partner, which is in headquartered in Munich. But I don't have a strong, let's say, reason for recommending them. And yeah, I see that's it. I think in the climate sector, I was probably one thing that inspired me most. I think a couple of years ago, there was how to help Extinction Rebellion having a platform for collaboration and a platform for campaigning, which I found it's a very, probably is difficult to get a paid job in that direction. Very few of those activists actually have a remuneration, but that was an inspiring area because it was everything open and you could join, become part of the activist groups organization and contribute to it. And I think that makes a difference.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hopefully, Greg, over the course of this, we'll be introducing to more folks and more organizations. And I know Scotia is hiring, so at least it says it's hiring on some of the websites. So keep your radar on that one. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and your thoughtfulness. I think I'll speak for everyone. Hopefully that's okay, that I leave really inspired and excited about what you're doing. And it's wonderful that people, not to make you a hero, because I feel like maybe you wouldn't like that, but it's great that people such as yourself exist. So thanks for spending time and everyone for coming and being prepared. And I look forward to future conversations with you all.
Likewise. Thank you, everyone, for your time and your kind words as well. And I'm looking ways to stay connected in the future as well.
We want you in every cohort to give this talk, so we will follow up. Take care, everyone. We'll see you on Slack and or future calls.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.